football nerds here to talk Auburn and Oregon. Got Josh with me. We're going to get nerdy. Obviously, we don't have a computer model yet because it's not week 4, but we can get nerdy anyway, flying by the seat of our pants. Want to remind everybody, especially some of you new faces, Oregon fans, Auburn fans, please hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and give us a like somewhere in the middle of this video when you figure out that we know what we're talking about. Okay, Josh, let's just jump right into this. We've talked this thing to death. This is the one game in these first few weeks where we have these cool interconference matchups. This is the one game where we really don't know much at all in terms of really how to pick it because they're on paper, they're close teams. And everybody wants to talk about Justin Herbert and the, it's probably going to be a Heisman campaign, probably going to be a top 3 draft pick. I want to go on the other side of the ball for the Auburn quarterback situation and talk about that first. Now, we did an Auburn preview and discussed how we might have some concerns with this Auburn offense, given that they essentially lost an NFL quarterback in Jarrett Stidham, who is tearing it up preseason right now for the Patriots. And now, since we've done that preview, it's come out, we know who the starter is. We've got this elite quarterback on one side of the ball and a guy making his first start, rookie quarterback, on the other side of the ball. Let's go positives first. Is there a silver lining here for Auburn fans, or are they just looking at this matchup, in this head-to-head matchup, and going, oh, crap, we're screwed?
Well, the silver lining to it is that Bo Nix's upside is tremendously higher, I think, than you were going to have if Gatewood had been the starter. And they're two different types of players. Gatewood, and it's something we said maybe was a positive for Auburn, was going to force him to be more run first. And we were a little worried to a certain extent if Nix started. Nothing to do with Nix, but just because the style of offense might sort of make us think that Malzahn's trying to go pass happy again. But Nix is a better thrower, and that's not really a shot on Gatewood at all. It's that Nix is a very, very accurate downfield passer. He's a 5-star quarterback for a reason. The guy has tremendous arm talent. He's a good runner. I think it's kind of funny when you read the internet stuff and people are commenting on him. I think some people, and we had the same discussion when Stidham came in as a starter 2 years ago, if people followed our channel. Don't go crazy with the idea of Nix as a runner. He's mobile in the same way, maybe more mobile than Herbert. But just like how Herbert was, a mobile, maybe dual threat guy in high school, you're not necessarily going to be a dual threat guy at this level because all of a sudden, what was a 4.6 or 4.7 guy is typically one of the fastest guys in the field in high school, and here they're going to be one of the slowest. Stidham was a 1,000-yard rusher in high school, and he was mobile but not necessarily a runner. But the silver lining is Auburn's going to have the ability to hit balls downfield with accuracy, and I think he's going to be able to do that in an offense where they're going to set up the big play, try to hit the big play, try to rely on the run game. But, I think the beauty sometimes in Malzahn's scheme, they're probably not going to ask Nix to do full field reads, but rather to take the opportunities when they're given, when they get the shot play, to take that throw. And when they need to hit a pass and they got a guy open downfield, I think, whatever else you want to say about Nix, he's going to be able to consistently do that. Really in the same way I think we just saw Jaron Williams, for all his faults, be able to do for Miami what for us was last night.
We've seen already that Oregon's kind of decimated at wide receiver from an injury standpoint. We weren't super high. The 2 years in a row, we weren't super high on Auburn's wide receivers. I think Washington fans got a little taste of that last year, in that they were good, not great, especially in game 1. They got a little bit better as the year went on. So in this situation, does it kind of bring the two to a balance where we've got established wide receivers that are healthy on one side of the ball for the rookie quarterback, and maybe taking a good step back at wide receiver on the other side of the ball? Does that bring what was probably a huge advantage to Oregon maybe a little bit closer to the middle?
I think it undoubtedly does. And you say that Auburn's receivers are, maybe aren't world beaters. And I want to be clear with that. It's not like we think Auburn's receivers are bad, but if you're talking at a top 10 level, Auburn's receivers are good guys. I think the loss they had at receiver is probably going to hurt them to a large degree, because when you talked about overall receivers, I felt like Slayton and Ryan Davis were probably the two guys that were the best all-around receivers. They've got Eli Stove and Schwartz are absolute burners, but that's a different thing about catching the ball in traffic or a 50-50 ball over somebody's head, which is what Slayton could do and bring to that offense. I think it balances it out, but at the end of the day, I do think, given the injury situation in Oregon, maybe these guys turn out to be great. None of them have any production. We can't even really speculate too much in what they're like because we haven't seen them at all. I think Auburn probably has an edge at receiver, and that does kind of balance out a little bit the fact that if Oregon had all the receivers they had last year, and if they had still had Mitchell, you got Mitchell and you got a potential first-round draft pick at quarterback and Herbert, Oregon would have an advantage in the passing game over Auburn, just because they'd have an advantage in the passing game over most teams. With the injury situation at receiver, you kind of have an interesting thing where one team has an established top-shelf quarterback and no receivers at all. The other team has a top-shelf, completely inexperienced quarterback and then established not top three draft pick or not three top round kind of guys at receiver, kind of opposites in, one unit. Both units have, or both sides of the ball, Auburn and Oregon, both have a 5-star high ceiling guy at quarterback, but then the experience level between them, all balanced on the receiving side for Auburn, all balanced in the quarterback position for Oregon.
If we're talking, one thing that I hate is when people compare teams and they're like, and we kind of did it already, but I still hate it when they're like, all right, Auburn's offensive line is better than Oregon's offensive line, or Auburn's defensive line is better than their defensive line. Those two units don't play one another. It's the matchup that matters. And for me, yes, I think Oregon, we saw the difference when they had some injuries last year. I think Oregon's offensive line, we've established, is pretty good. One of the things that's interesting to me is not a lot of people are talking about Oregon's defensive line versus Auburn's offensive line. And a lot of people are putting this as kind of the accepted win category for Auburn. And I want to say not so fast. And I'd like for you to unpack this a little bit if you agree with me. If you don't agree with me, don't unpack it. We'll just go to the next question. Auburn returns a lot of starters in the offensive line. And everyone is assuming that that's going to be a strength. But they're returning starters that were pretty ill-effective in the SEC last year, especially in the run game. And part of that is because Bobby Whitlow got hurt and they didn't have a lot of depth at running back. But also part of it is Stidham was running for his life a lot, and they couldn't really establish a lot of their offense because they had limitations at offensive line. And I don't think Oregon's defensive line and pass rush is going to be bad this year. I think it's going to be pretty solid. So is this an opportunity where we maybe can go a little bit against the grain and say just because they're returning starters, they may not be good and give the edge even to Oregon here?
I think it's fair. So when you talk about Auburn and their offensive line, they return a lot of starters. They have a lot of high potential on NFL draft boards because they've been really good in pass blocking. Prince Winogo has a high ceiling. He didn't allow a ton of pressures last year, but that line also didn't generate a lot of push. I think when you look back at Auburn's season last year, one of the reasons why it was disappointing to a large extent was the fact that in a lot of their big games, they really couldn't run the ball. When they played Texas A&M, Auburn was able to win that game 28-24, but they had 19 yards and 21 carries. Could not run the ball at all. Now, A&M, as we talked about all year, great rush defense, one of the best in the SEC, and probably one of the worst pass defenses in the SEC in the same unit. It was really weird. But even games like the Tennessee game where they took that huge loss for them, 3.7 yards per carry. So and maybe you can touch on this a little bit. I think there's probably a misconception in both Auburn's fans' mind and even probably a lot of Pac-12 fans' minds that this game is going to hinge on how well, Oregon can hand up physically against Auburn. I don't think Oregon's offensive line is anything to sneeze at when they're healthy. 2, I don't know that Auburn is going to have the ability to boss around Oregon's front defensively, given the fact that Auburn wasn't really able to get a lot of push in the SEC last season.
Well, I think there's two sides to this. Like, everybody on the other side is talking about Auburn's defensive line being able to sort of affect the game and being their ace in the hole in this game. I wonder, though, kind of, and you were touching on it, Auburn isn't necessarily that style of offense like some of the other teams in the SEC. So I don't know that they necessarily have to be able to push people. Now, we have a long history of talking about the QB power and how Gus Malzahn operates his offense, and he needs that fullback, and they do need to be able to get that 4 or 5 yard run anytime they want to get it. But in the same vein, I do think we're seeing a little bit more pass focus Gus Malzahn and a little more finesse based on their personnel. So I don't know that they have to get that push, but we did see, and we flagged this in the beginning of the year and took a lot of heat from Auburn fans about it. We did see, we were worried about the run game all year, and part of it was running back, part of it was offensive line, and it reared its ugly head every time they lost a game. Now, I think that on the flip side, this defensive line is probably going to be a bit of a shock to Oregon fans, because it is something that they're not going to see any for the rest of the year in the Pac-12. And that's not a shot at the Pac-12. It's just Auburn's defensive line is legit within what's considered the defensive line, part of the country in the SEC. They're upper crust. So, but one of the other areas, based on what we've seen on film where they might be exploited is, they might be able to get a pass rush. They might have a stone wall for the run game. But those linebackers, is Oregon going to go after those linebackers?
I mean, from what I've seen, I think that's probably what Oregon's going to attack. So think about it from Oregon's perspective. You've had a lot of injuries and turnover at the receiver position. You aren't going to have the guy that was your go-to safety blanket in Mitchell from last year. The guys that you were kind of expecting to rely upon, even, a true freshman, all those guys pretty much are hurt. And we're not going to go down the list, but it's like 4 or 5 guys have been in and out of all fall camp. We're not even sure if maybe 1 or 2 get to play in this game, but a rash of injuries, okay? Where your strength is offensively is your quarterback and his ability to make good decisions and make accurate throws, and an offensive line that can sort of probably be able to hold up. Got a few all-conference players there, and they should all be healthy at the beginning of the season. I think they're going to want to attack in the short passing game. It's where they were comfortable last year. They threw to the backs and tight end a lot. Again, they don't have the tight end they had last season. They don't have the same back they have last season. That doesn't mean they're going to change the offense, I think.
The system's there.
Right. And the flip side, when you look at Auburn, again, and you said in the SEC, really nationally, Auburn probably is a top 5 defensive line unit, if they're not the top defensive line. I think you can safely say top 5 defensive line unit probably nationally. And you don't want to attack that. And Auburn's secondary, we've gone back and forth a lot on how good Auburn's secondary is, because the D-line and the front 7 has been so good, it's kind of hard to judge them.
They're okay. Sorry, Auburn fans. They're okay. They're not elite.
And that's the same criticism I would say we've given to Clemson the past few years, which is their secondary is pretty good, and they've often had 1 or 2 NFL guys in the secondary. But when you looked at, if they went 5 or 6 deep and they had anybody that ever had time to throw, maybe it's a different game. Doesn't really matter though if you can generate a pass rush. The problem for Auburn is you have complete turnover at the linebacker position, and we say this a lot. If you want to accept that Deshaun Davis was a good player and that Darrell Williams was a good player, then you have to accept that you've lost something. And as good as Deshaun Davis was for Auburn the past few years, it's going to take a lot for them to reproduce that production. So I think what Oregon's going to do is they're not going to rely on their guys to get separation downfield, because that requires time to throw. That's going to make Herbert have to have time to throw. And we've another thing I sort of noticed, I looked at the Cal game and the Washington game back to back just to sort of figure out what the heck happened, because Cal, who was a great pass defense last year, Herbert kind of lit him up. Washington, he struggled terribly, and that was the next game. The thing I noticed is Herbert struggled when he was off the mark. So when he had to throw deep, when he's not able to throw in rhythm, throwing, when I say on the mark, meaning where he wants to be in the pocket, be on the rollout or whatnot, he had some accuracy issues. You don't want to be trying to do that against an Auburn team that's going to cause disruption. So if you get guys in the flat, you isolate linebackers on tight ends, on running backs, and on receivers, screens, all that kind of stuff, get them moving horizontally, then you sort of negate a lot of the advantages Auburn maybe has the defensive line. Maybe you're able to exploit some things in the linebacking core. And I think to a large extent that's going to be Oregon's game plan, and it's going to kind of determine how well Oregon operates offensively.
We have to do this, and I'm sorry, listeners, because it's really not fair. It's kind of like preseason polls. It's a lot of vapor, but we got to look a little bit back at last year and how these two teams ended. I mean, the Utah game was weird for me because I thought, Oregon passing game did pretty well against a really good defense, but only scratched 25 points together. The Michigan State game's a little concerning to me on one side and a little not concerning to me on the other side. 7-6. I don't care that you held Michigan State to 6 points, because most flag football teams last year that had a deep bench could hold Michigan State to 6 points. They were awful offensively, but defensively they were also an elite plus unit. I mean, probably the second best defense in the country behind Mississippi State. And so 7 points looks terrible on paper, and you think, okay, they're about to face a good defense again. I'm not totally upset about that either. Now, I don't love it, but I don't think you can look at that game and then look at how Auburn ended with Purdue and take much from either of those games. So if we got to do this, Josh, if we got to say, okay, let's look at the production last year and take just something from it in terms of matchups or how these two teams go together, is there one thing that we can take from the second half of the year or the bowl games or something that we can look at to give us a line on this game?
Honestly, I'm not sure there is. When you look at how the season ended for Oregon, there were a lot of things that all came together. One, Oregon had injuries to the offensive line really starting that Washington game that I think put them out of sync. And they got in a funk in the Washington State and Arizona game. They get all the way to the Oregon State game, and then Herbert injures his shoulder. If you watched Oregon, I know probably a lot of Auburn fans watched Oregon play Michigan State because it was a bowl. Herbert had a hurt shoulder. He wasn't the same player at that point. Defensively, they were, maybe not as out of sorts, but they, for the most part, played pretty good ball. They weren't allowing, more than 30 points in those games, save the Arizona game, which was just sort of a bizarre aberration and a combination of a lot of things going wrong. So it's tough to take a lot from Oregon in the end of the last season. I'll turn it around, though, and maybe you'll agree with this. If I were to say one thing that defines Oregon, if I'm trying to find something that maybe gives an indication of how this game's going to go, my eyes start to go to the pass rush and the ability for Oregon to generate, some sort of disruption defensively. The end of the season, the Arizona State game, the Oregon State game, and the Michigan State game, they started generating a lot more tackles for loss. When you looked at Oregon in the middle of last season, so Cal, Washington, from that point, they had 5 or more tackles for loss in each of the early games. Bowling Green, 7, Portland State, FCS, they had 9, 6, 5, 5. And what happened in the Washington State game and the Arizona game in large part is they weren't able to get disruption. 1 tackle for loss in the entire Washington State game. Not shocking given the air raid scheme that Leach runs and how quick they throw the ball, but no tackles for loss also means you're not getting any disruption in the run game. Only 3 in the Arizona game, only 3 in the UCLA game, and then it started stepping back up again. You get 6 against Utah, 7 against Arizona State, 8 against Oregon State, 7 against Michigan State. So it was really tackles for loss, if you want to look at it plainly, that kind of determined their season to a certain extent. When they played better football at the end of the year, they were able to disrupt the other team offensively in the backfield, and when they weren't, that's when they weren't playing very good ball. The concern there is when you look at the tackle for loss statistics in terms of what Oregon is returning. Oregon's top 5 guys in tackles for loss were Hollins, Dye, Jelks, Apulu, and Amati. The only one with double digits was Hollins, the linebacker. Of those top 5, you lose Hollins, Jelks, Apulu, and Amati. Only the number 2 guy, which was Troy Dye at linebacker, is returning. So it's almost a total reset for Oregon in terms of their ability to create disruption, both in the run and the pass. So I think to answer your question, there's not a ton of takeaways from a broad sense, but if I look through the whole season, there was a pattern with tackles for loss. That's one of the areas with having the greatest amount of turnover. And so to me, that's probably going to be one of the defining things in this game. Can Oregon generate disruption against Auburn? And I don't know the answer to that question right now. Are they able to replicate what they had last year, or are they going to be unable to rush the passer? Because if they can't rush the passer, they can't get in the backfield, I think Auburn is going to be much more comfortable, especially with a true freshman quarterback. Maybe the X factor there is Thibodeau, who obviously everybody's all-time recruit, but It's going to be interesting to see how that works out.
Yeah, and Oregon fans need to be careful here. I think there's a lot of expectation and a lot of hype, and I'm not being negative because true freshmen do pan out. But I think there's a lot of assumption that Oregon's probably a top 5 team, maybe a national championship contender, because they've had a couple of key pieces on the recruiting trail paired with maybe, we saw how good Oregon could be when everybody was healthy last year. And I do think Thibodeau coming in could be that spark, that replacement. But for every one of those, there's 5 Anomas from Alabama who was 5-star everything defensive end, didn't play his freshman year at all, and now is not even on the team anymore. So I think he's going to be good, but that's what makes this so hard. The theme, I think, of this episode is we don't know. Like, we don't know anything. And I hate to say that because it makes it sound like, well, why am I watching? But this is the place. This is the area where we've got pressure, pass rush proven. That's a lot of P's on Auburn's side. And we have what we think might be an elite pass rusher and might be an elite disruptor on the Oregon side, but we don't know. And that might be what the game hinges on. Whether or not they can replace those tackles for loss in a freshman or in somebody else or in the aggregate. And man, right now we don't know. So I think it's time for us to do a little picking on this game. And after me saying we don't know, now we're going to act like we know. Josh, why don't you go first? I've been going first on a couple of these lately. So why don't you go first? Tell me what you think the score of this game is going to be, and then I'll follow up.
So the key that I had in the Florida-Miami game, and it was a blind guess, right? But the thing that I saw that I thought I knew was that Florida returned more proven production in terms of the ability to rush the passer and create disruption than Miami did. Both those teams had concerns with the offensive line. I think those concerns were worse than we anticipated, but the thing that I thought maybe was enough of an edge to keep Florida winning the game was the proven production of the pass rush. I'm seeing the same thing here. Auburn has more proven ability to disrupt an offense than Oregon does. Lines are usually not really all together at this point in the season, and Oregon has just a ton of turnover. I think this is an extremely close game. I think it's last I checked, it's a 3.5-point line that Auburn's a favorite. I'm going to go 24-20, so I'm going a half point over that line, and that was my opinion before I knew what the line was. I do think this game could swing either way. I think it's probably going to be low scoring given a lot of the variables involved. But really, I think it all hinges on how much can Oregon actually create disruption in Auburn's offense, which we don't know, and how much can Auburn's linebacking core hold up and either create disruption or stay solvent in the passing game such that Oregon has to have enough time to be sacked.
I think it's a fair number, and I think your score prediction, it's close to mine. And based on, we talked about our score predictions with the Florida-Miami game. We both said this game's going to be ugly. I think this game will also be ugly for different reasons. So last year to open the season, Auburn and Washington, we both picked Auburn. We came out right in that game, but that game was really ugly. And I think in a different way than Florida-Miami, because I think that game was ugly because those teams aren't that great. I think both of these teams are better than those two teams we saw, but I think it's going to be ugly for a different reason. One, you've got a lot of new faces in really important places on both sides of the ball for both teams. But two, this game has significant magnitude for both teams for the rest of the year, even though I think both of them have a little bit different goals. I feel like I've been a little negative on Oregon this show, but I'm actually picking them to win this game. I think the experience at quarterback trumps the experience at defensive line, pass rush, negative plays. And I think having that comfort blanket of a healthy offensive line coming back finally and everybody being healthy in game one is going to be the difference in this game. Auburn's offensive line, I predict, will have as much trouble with Oregon's pass rush and run defense as Oregon will with Auburn. I'm going Oregon 23, Auburn 21, and like you, it's close. Looking at the mybookie.com lines right now, it's 3.5. I expect it to move a little bit this week, but not a lot because we just don't know what we don't know with this game. But we do this sometimes. I'd like to do it one more time. If Oregon wins this game, give me the reason why. If Auburn wins this game, give me the reason why.
Well, first, a note, it's kind of interesting. They're both well under. Looking at the over-under is 55.5. So we both think it's kind of a defensive struggle. And I say that because for both teams, I think the team that wins is going to be the team that finds a way to generate some offense. If Oregon wins this game, it's going to be that they're able to exploit a new linebacking core at Auburn and be able to get the ball out quickly and move the ball without having to take shots downfield. Maybe they can hit shots downfield. It would surprise me quite a bit just because I don't think they're going to have time to throw that much given just how good Auburn's front is. On the flip side, if Auburn's able to win this game, I think it's going to be that Oregon's front just isn't able to generate enough pressure. And a lot like what we saw with Miami with Williams, yeah, you may have a first-time starter here at quarterback, but Nix is tremendously talented. And if he has time to throw, Auburn's receivers are so fast, they're going to get depth downfield, and a true freshman quarterback can have a lot of problems, but it doesn't mean that he can't hit a 60-yard bomb with accuracy if he's as talented as Nix is. So I think whoever wins this game is probably going to be the team that finds a way to generate some offense and exploit enough matchups to get into the mid-20s point range. Which always means it's really volatile, but that's kind of about the point to me. Once you start getting you got to hit about 25. You got to get over 20 points, and that doesn't take a ton of production, but it takes a little bit of a niche.
You've talked a little bit this show about exploiting the linebackers, and I think they're going to exploit the linebackers in a way that Lane Kiffin did at Alabama and USC, in that we're going to see a lot of horizontal, and then we're going to see something over the top. So my prediction is we will see a touchdown or two that come from them lulling Auburn to sleep and them having to accommodate for those linebackers getting exploited. And until Auburn shores up their running situation and their red zone situation, which has been the thing that I've harped on for the last few years, they have not been good under Gus Malzahn, regardless of what type of offensive coordinator, co-coordinator, underling calling the plays, himself calling the plays. It's been a staple for him at Auburn that they've struggled in the red zone. And, y'all, it's red zone touchdowns, not red zone scoring. And I think that's going to rear its ugly head here again. So, yeah, I feel not great about my pick right now because I just don't know these two teams. But 23-21 is mine, and you've got, 24-20. Yep. Any other parting shots on this one?
No, I think that's about a wrap.
All right, y'all, that's Auburn, Oregon. We're kind of split on this one. And look, sometimes we've been split on these in the past, and people have said we pick these to make everybody happy. We don't. We piss more people off than we make people happy. So do know that these are our picks, and this is who we're going with. And one of us is going to have to own it next week, and we'll probably do it on video because the other one will make fun of them. Thanks so much, y'all, for hanging around this long. Remember, mybookie.com, $1,000 up to for first deposit match. Y'all check them out. Y'all have a great week, and God bless.